Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Patricia Rhee, FAIA, DBIA, and partner at, Ehrlich, Yanai, Rhee, Chaney Architects, with offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Patricia received her master's degree in architecture from Harvard's Graduate School of Design and has been a member of the firm since the year 2000. She has served as designer for some of the firm's most notable and award-winning projects, including the Press, the Culver Steps, Ivy Station, the UAE Federal National Council Parliament Complex, and the John M. Roll Federal Courthouse. She has served on design juries with the AIA Academy of Architecture for Justice, DBIA National, multiple AIA Design Award juries, and local architecture schools. Patricia was a founding co-chair of the AIA Los Angeles Women in Architecture Committee and serves on the board of Heidi Duckler Dance. The project we will be talking about today is The Press in Costa Mesa, California. In Costa Mesa, the former auxiliary Los Angeles Times printing press facility stands as a relic of a bygone era of information consumption. Built during the latter half of the last century, this complex of concrete panels and steel frames has survived the digital revolution. The press has been transformed into a creative office space, and the expansive halls that once accommodated machinery now welcome people. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Patricia Rhee, FAIA, DBIA, partner at, let's see if I can get this one right, Ehrlich, Yanai, Rhee, Chaney Architects.
You got it.
Yes, with offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco, California. The project we are chatting about today, the very cool project we are chatting about today, is The Press in Costa Mesa, California. Patty, welcome to Detailed. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Everybody's smiley today, getting ready to go into the 3-day weekend. It's like instant happiness.
Yeah.
So I always like to start the podcast with some kind of fun or interesting icebreaker question just to get us warmed up. And so for you today, I'd like to know, what is the best and the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Okay, I'll start with the best. So it's from my parents. They, ever since I was a young kid, they would always tell me to try my best. Try your best. That was their mantra. And I think, especially from a young age, it really did instill a strong sense of self-motivation in me. Them both being immigrant parents, having come over in the 60s, just watching them, particularly my dad, work hard and do the best that they could do with the limited things that they had, really taught me a lot. Okay, and then the worst, let's see. So this is something that gets said here and there. And at first I would kind of listen to it and be like, okay, I'll try it out. It's fake it till you make it. And I've always been a bit uncomfortable with that. It just doesn't work for me because it really kind of feels a little counter to who I am. So I think it's just by nature I don't like to let people down. So that's why I would call it my worst.
I've been given that piece of advice over the years as well, especially with my pretty non-traditional trajectory in this business. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing I hate more than to fail.
Yeah.
And when you jump into a pool that you don't know if you can handle it, you're setting yourself up for a pretty good opportunity for failure, or you rise to the challenge. But I would rather just be brutally honest and say, this is what I can do, and I think I can handle that, but
I'm with you.
Let's see where, yeah, exactly.
What you see is what you get. So
yes, that's why I knew we would be friends. So this project, there is so much going on in this project. I know I joked with you that we could talk for a week about this, but I think we actually could. And it was a little difficult to know where to start. So I figured, how about, because I thought the history of this building is pretty interesting. Giving me a little history on this is originally the Los Angeles Times printing press facility. So a little history on that building and what you had to work with going into this project.
Got it. So I think what I'll start with is how the project came to us. The developer Steelwave, their Orange County office, they were going to have a competition to basically revamp that existing LA Times printing press site, which was at the time back in 2017. It was abandoned. Nobody was occupying it except for wildlife. And they wanted to turn this kind of industrial complex into something that would be like a creative campus. So they approached us. We decided to go for the competition. We won the competition, and basically they started the construction soon thereafter, like in 2018 or so. The building itself, I mentioned it was abandoned. It was completely overgrown in terms of all the landscaping. There were birds nesting within the abandoned areas. I mean, it really felt like ruins. Like we walked into where the printing presses used to be located, and there would be like a broken skylight up top with just like a shaft of light coming through. It's very spooky, but like also romantic at the same time. And it really did have an impact, just our team walking through. There were these 50-foot high, tall open spaces. We dubbed them the cathedrals because they were just kind of glorious in their kind of large open state with just bare minimum light coming through. And we immediately knew this is something we wanted to maintain where possible within the project. There are also these like 25-foot long cantilevers where you had the loading docks on both east and west sides that we also wanted to keep in place as much as we could. The original building was designed by William Pereira's office back in 1968, and it had been kind of filled in and aggregated over the years, over the decades. At the time, or once it finished all of its aggregations in like the early 80s, it was 1,150 feet long, which is incredibly long for one building. So also kind of in our mindset was, how do we kind of break this super long building up so that you could have access within and also just have some porosity throughout that building. The original building did have a newsroom on the northern side, on the Harbor Boulevard side, and then it was connected by a covered walkway to the printing presses side. And so when the developer came to us, they wanted us to make this into a place for humans, multi-tenanted, and have a lot of flexibility. There was even an idea of, at the southern end side that's kind of closer to IKEA, that would be a food hall open to the public, like a market hall. And so a destination in and of itself. So there were a lot of ideas on how the site could really have mixed uses and really be something unique to this area in Orange County.
Sounds like you had your work cut out for you.
Yeah. It was, but from the very beginning, it was just kind of an amazing opportunity. And the developer was also, they just had such great vision.
So tell me about some of your major design goals. Once you started, digging into this project, what was the vision? What did you start seeing within this, what sounds like a Dune movie set site?
Yeah.
Where did your brain take you? Where were you going to go with it?
Well, so we really wanted to preserve and highlight kind of these industrial ruins, these industrial remnants, which you don't necessarily see, especially in Orange County, within these kind of office campuses. So as much as we could preserve that was really a goal for us. But then you have to take this building that was originally built for machines, and then how do you bring in daylight, views, fresh air, and access to that all? So those were kind of like the biggest goals and design challenges that we had. Yeah, so, and really how to do that in a way that hangs on to what you've got, but it's also perfectly functional and useful for the work that happens today.
We have a lot of those kind of buildings in Portland where they've taken this old industrial space and turned it into a place for humans, and they really do have a lot of character. And done right, they're beautiful places. You know, you don't feel like you're in that box office building or whatever when you're
there's
able
a lot
to do
of
that.
like unique characteristics that you just wouldn't find in any other building, nor would you think to put into a building. But when you have it, you've got to preserve it, I feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What would you say? I bet you had a hard time thinking about this question. What would you say the biggest design challenge was on this project, and how did you solve it? Teach me something.
So the biggest design challenge was, I mean, there were a lot of challenges whenever you're dealing with an existing building because, and especially when you're trying to preserve as much as what you've got. But I would say a lot of the challenges relate to the structure of it. We talked to our structural engineer, it was Seifel Bouquet, very early on in the process, even during the competition process, where we walked the site together and we're like, hey, we want to keep as much of what, these industrial ruins as we can. We didn't want to convert it into something where you wouldn't recognize what it used to be. And so, for example, the cantilever canopies and the precast concrete walls, they were all very integrated. And if you wanted to make openings, because, a lot of this is bringing in daylight, views, air. If you want to make openings in the concrete, they would have to be limited in size and really prescriptively located, which is like within the center of the concrete panel. And then also, you couldn't just take out all the concrete panels willy-nilly, because if you did too much of that, the cantilever canopies would lose their integrity. So there was like this careful balance of, we did need to keep a lot in place so that all the things we wanted to stay could stay. So these are things that, we had to work together early on with our engineer to make sure we were doing the right thing. Because as you all know, there are cost implications. So I think there were also issues with like the foundations. I mean, things kind of like you don't really see and it's below ground that we had to deal with because we didn't have structural drawings given the age of the building. And so there was just a lot to deal with in terms of making sure the building was up to code, you're keeping what you want to keep, and then making sure the money is going to be spent in the places that matter.
Okay, I'm already going down my first rabbit hole.
That's okay.
And this popped into my head based on another interview that I just did. Another kind of, the term coming out all over is radical reuse kind of project. It was a gas station that they turned into an art and community center. So gas station, chemicals, ground contamination. This formerly being a printing press building, did you have any issues with anything like that?
I have worked on projects where you have to do quite a bit of remediation, but this project did not have a significant amount of that. And we did actually have a filling station within our property, which we radically reimagined into kind of the orientation center, kind of like the first pavilion that one goes to when you arrive at the site. But
nice.
Luckily we didn't have it. Yeah. It's where all the trucks would line up to fill up on gas before delivering all their papers.
Newspapers, I remember those.
Yeah.
Before we start getting into building specifics, explain to me and our listeners what you mean by selective subtraction, a selective subtraction approach.
Yeah, so that was what we kind of came upon early on, and that was just kind of reinforcing those goals, those original goals of like trying to keep in place all the like glorious industrial ruins that existed. And so to bring in the fresh air, daylight, and the views and the access, it was an approach of removal versus adding. We did do some adding, and I'll talk about that later on. But essentially, and we have a diagram that shows this where we show all of our subtractions in pink. They occur at various scales. It's on the one hand, we took out large swath of buildings just to create access from the east side to the west side. There's actually a sister property to the east of the project that they wanted to also have a connection to. So we removed whole swaths, like bays of the building where we left the structure in place, but we removed all the roofing. So it becomes like this open air corridor or cross through the building. And what that allowed was, because when we were thinking this was going to be a multi-tenant building, it allowed the different tenants to have access in their own front doors to their spaces. It also brought in fresh air, views, daylight into these formerly dark spaces because they were covered with roofing. So all of a sudden, when you bring glass into there, they have all those things. So, at the scale of those swaths of the building, at the scale of this indoor-outdoor atrium, which you created in the center of our project, but also at a smaller scale where you're removing concrete panels, like several concrete panels in a row to create either like an indoor-outdoor room or a balcony or just openings and then like smaller punched openings for windows, operable windows or balconies or skylights, etc. So it kind of at various scales, it can be applied.
Let's get more specific about the project itself. And I like to just kind of work from the outside in. So let's start with the site. Was there anything unique or challenging that you had to tackle with the existing site? And if so, what did you do?
So it was a lot, mostly surface parking, and the building kind of sat in the middle of all this surface parking. I wouldn't say there were extreme challenges with that site. There was an existing rail line that is not used anymore, and that eventually became what we call the rail trail, and it's actually a public accessible trail that runs through our site and connects to other sites on either side. And you can also see spurs off that line where we come up to the loading dock areas. So those were kind of cool. I wouldn't say that they were like problems or challenges to the site, but there were cool remnants of the site that told kind of the story of what it once used to be that we also tried to keep in place. So you can still see those lines embedded into the paving.
I think that's kind of cool that you can reimagine it rather than just rip it out and make it something useful for the current site, but still keep some of that history and the richness of that.
And that rail trail is a walking path, so it's anyone in the public can actually walk through. So it is interesting because you don't really think of these kind of industrial properties when you're in this part of Orange County. So that's why I feel like it's really kind of a unique, and just at that scale that it exists, I think it's kind of, it's really interesting, I would say.
Well, and I really love that because I don't think anything makes me more sad than to watch really interesting buildings or structures get ripped down for one more glassy high rise, or not that those don't have their place and they're not beautiful, they are as well, but keeping some of that background and that history and that personality, just like that gas station interview I did that's now this community center, and they did some of the coolest things there from this old rundown gas station. But they kept the gas station and kept the theme of the gas station in rebuilding this thing.
Yeah.
I think neighborhoods and areas could use a little personality.
Yeah.
Everything
And
doesn't have to look alike.
just knowing like it makes people question, oh, what was here before?
Yeah.
And to see how things can get reused in a new and interesting way, I think is good versus always starting from scratch every time, to feel kind of the patina of what was there before, their stories behind that. It makes one question. I think it's always a good thing.
Well, and the LA Times is kind of a celebrity in itself. In California. I don't live in
Mm-hmm.
California, but of course I know what the LA Times is. So,
Mm.
there's some history there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about the exterior building
Mhm.
design for a minute. You've talked about already a little bit what you started with. Where did you go with the exterior of the building? I'm sure, I work for an enclosure consultant now, so I'm even more interested in what you do to get your building tight to make it look
Mhm.
nice, especially in a project like this.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about where we live, it affords us the opportunity to really have a lot of indoor outdoor spaces. And this project, it was just ripe for that kind of spatial configuration because we did this thing, we called it skeletonizing, where we remove the roof and you expose the structure and then you create these kind of indoor outdoor enclosure, partially covered or not, open to the elements. So that's a common theme throughout the project. And then when it comes to the facades, we really were taking the cue from what was there, which was predominantly these precast concrete panels that were painted. They were self-supporting, so it's not like those concrete panels were the primary structure, load-bearing structure for the building. So we were able to remove them, but if we were to keep them in place, you couldn't they have to have enough integrity to self-support them, to support themselves.
Right.
So what we did was we took the panels and we sandblasted them down so that they would go back to their natural gray color, and then just pulling panels out here and there, whether that was to open up a facade for the light, airs, and views, or to define those outdoor rooms. Again, it's kind of that process of subtraction. And I felt like this building was, I mean, this may sound a little corny, but I feel like it was really telling us what it wanted to do, how it wanted to be able to breathe. And I feel like when we talk about the exteriors, you can't talk about it without mentioning the landscape, which was a huge part of the project. We worked with LRM and, just always integrating this kind of the plant life within the architecture. It was really kind of what brought things to life. So, for example, we'll have these vertical cable vines that kind of stretch from the roof structure of the auditorium and connect down to planters down below or on the loading dock to create like a vertical screen. We planted trees in the canopy, loading dock canopies, and we'd like put an opening within the canopy so that there would be this ability for the tree to grow through the canopy and provide something up for the second level folks. And I just love that kind of intersection of like the industrial past with like the new life, the new green life.
Well, I don't think it's corny at all that you were. I really don't, because I think when you try to make a building something it doesn't want to be is where you end up with something that doesn't turn out all that amazing.
Yeah.
I think you have to, for this kind of project, get into that frame of mind to be able to do that, adaptive reuse and still have it work. So that's not corny. I'm as corny as I get, so it doesn't matter anyway. But tell me about some of the materials and systems you used on,
Yep.
More specifically on the exterior of the building.
Yeah. So obviously we used a lot of glass, a lot of clear glass. And let's see. So we did curtain wall. That was Liberty glass and metal. The glazing itself, we used Vitro. And then we did a lot of glass roll-up doors. And so we really use this to, especially like in the atrium, to create a connection to like a patio space adjacent to it. or just really open up an outdoor patio that's at grade to the indoor space beyond. That's something that we like to employ in a lot of our projects, kind of extend your interior space. Let's see. And so for the roll-up doors, we used Amar doors. And then while most of the building is the existing footprint, or subtraction thereof, we also did have one area of the project where we did have a tilt-up concrete addition. That's towards the harbor side. And it was a one-story tilt-up, and we used Reckley for the form liner. And what we used was like this form liner that had this kind of curvilinear profile, and that was irregular. So it gave kind of like a softness to, because the curves would pick up the light in a different way, it gave a softness to that, to tilt up. The tilt up is kind of an interesting material because obviously it's very durable given that it's made out of concrete, but it goes up very quickly and it's pretty cost effective. And we found that Reckley profile really looks great when it's layered with murals, which we had a lot of. We worked with 2x4 out of New York City on the graphic arts, the environmental art. We eventually used that same form liner on an R&D building that is also on site. It's a little further to the west of the project, and that was all ground up. And then just a couple of other materials. We brought a lot of natural wood into the project, but because it was going to be outdoors, we wanted to make sure it was going to really be durable. So we used Hikari and Kebony, which is a thermally modified wood product. We used those on the horizontal surfaces because they were going to take a lot of wear and tear. Interestingly enough, we worked with two manufacturers just due to it. The project was constructed during COVID, and so there were like we needed to have more options there. So, and then for the wood ceilings and walls, that some of them were exposed completely, some of them were partially covered. We used Akoya, and that's also another modified wood product, good for maintenance, good for durability, but both products having that natural wood look.
It's funny that you mentioned both Kebony and Akoya. Just as an aside, I had never heard of either one until about 6 months ago, probably. And I mean, that's what I do for a living, is I write specs about products. And I have had probably 10 interviews now that somebody was using something from Kebony or Akoya. It's just like, I don't know where I've been, but totally brand new to me. So there's a lot of wow moments looking at the pictures of the interior of this building. Start with just a general overview of the spaces within this building, because I was just like, wow, I did some homework. I was just really impressed. So tell me about some of the spaces you designed within the building.
Sure. So I think I can start with the filling station, which I had mentioned. And that was obviously pulled apart from the rest of the mass of the building because this is where the trucks would come and fill up. So they needed to have driveways, et cetera, coming around to it. So we kept the canopy of the filling station, and then it's become like an orientation pavilion that's open air with like seating, et cetera. They may have brought in a kind of F&B element, but I'm not sure. So you start there, and then if you proceed forward, you're proceeding eastward, you'll see the what we call like the main atrium, the indoor-outdoor atrium, and there's like a procession that leads you through it, with the landscape walkway, and then there's like some skeletonized roofs as you go into that. And then you can see kind of partially written out the old signage that was unearthed during construction that says like Los Angeles for the Los Angeles Times. And that was something we didn't actually know existed until they started sandblasting the concrete. And we're like, that's amazing. We got to keep that. And so when you proceed there, you are in this atrium. I call it an atrium space because it is 3 stories high. It's got it's skeletonized, open to the elements, and there's all sorts of these pop-outs that come on all sides of you, where it's one tenant's kind of conference room that's enclosed, or it's the elevator, the landing to the elevator lobbies, or it's a suspended deck from the 3rd floor that is their kind of outdoor patio space. We made the circulation all exterior, so it's like a series of catwalks or a very visible stair, so that wayfinding is very intuitive. And then from that central atrium, you can go either to tenants on the right side, tenants on the left side. And every tenant space is going to be unique, just because it's not even like a plain warehouse space that is very straightforward and repetitive. Because it was aggregated over time and because there were different specific program elements within them, they're all extremely differentiated. And then you can also pass through to the east side of the building if you keep going by, there's like a small walkway that is 1 story high, and we have one of the 2x4 murals along that wall. What we did with the graphics, the environmental graphics, was we wanted it to not just be like murals slapped wherever, where we wanted them more to be either things that kind of intrigue you and pull you toward it, and so it takes you to a path, like for example to the other side of the building, or it's discovered, so it's like on the underside of one of the conference room elements, or it's something that you only perceive when you're leaving the building. So that kind of was fun to work with in terms of just going beyond wayfind. It's like combining the wayfinding with the graphic arts. So, and then just in terms of the space, it's a huge project, and so we have multiple points of entry. So there's that one grand atrium space, which the idea was that we wanted to have a cathedral space for at least one area where everyone could access it, in the case that if it were a multi-tenant building, and that it wouldn't just be like, well, certain tenants would be able to have that. And then as you move along the project towards the south, we do have, I would say, secondary entrances that take you into other tenant spaces. And then at the very southern end, that was originally going to be a market hall, but that became the canteen. And then that there's a significantly sized outdoor area, which is almost like a park that is essentially like the park for the canteen area, with a little pavilion in there for like events and community gatherings, etc.
I'm assuming the huge atrium space that you're talking about is the same place that there is that crazy stair.
Yeah, it's not so crazy, but yeah.
Well, from the picture, I mean,
I'm just
it
kidding.
Just pops out at you. But
yeah.
What is that? Is that all metal?
Yes, so it's weathered steel.
Okay,
that's left to weather naturally.
I love that.
And you can see like the stainless. I'm not sure which view you're looking at, but if you look carefully, you can see like these stainless steel cables that run from planters in the ground plane up to the roof structure, and those
I didn't realize that's what that was until you said that, at least from this particular picture. So those planters at the bottom, those plants are eventually going to grow up,
and they have. So today you can, if you were to visit, that you can see the vines. So there would these vertical green lines going up from top to bottom, which is it's kind of again that intersection of the living and the past, the industrial past.
I just love there's so many different things going on in this space. Like you just keep wanting to look around, like that platform, up at the top of that stair, just kind of hanging over the space with people hanging out up there. I love that.
Yeah, and if you look carefully, you'll see there's rods, so that is also suspended from the roof. We suspended from the roof where we could, because just to have all these things feel like they're floating above you as you walk through.
So I did a little homework and looked up a number of pictures of the original building, which looked really closed in. and really dark from what I could see of these pictures I could find of it from back in the day. Now there's windows and light everywhere. And you had these concrete panels on these steel frames to work with. Was it challenging getting all those windows in there?
It wasn't so challenging because, again, we talked to our structural engineer early on, and they were basically like, okay, you want your window dimension to be this wide. Height was more variable, but it really couldn't exceed this dimension, and it wanted to be located in the center, and then we could make windows all day long. So that was kind of good to have those kind of prescribed things prescribed to us, right? So it could be pretty straightforward. And then if we did that, we wouldn't need to reinforce with any steel. If you got bigger than that, which we did every now and then, we would have to reinforce with steel. But it was essentially, they were saw cutting through the concrete.
I was just going to say, so the windows didn't only go in places where you took out those concrete panels. You actually cut into some of the concrete.
Oh, yes. Yeah, if you look at, especially on the east and west facades, that's where you'll see a lot of these kind of like punched-looking windows, especially at the second floor, to bring in the light.
Because I was trying to figure out, it's like, did they cut into all those panels, or?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that's incredible, because I don't like dark spaces. So when I saw the windows, I'm like, yes. One of the interesting little pieces of information I read that I wanted to ask about is I read that the former conveyor belts that were in the original building were preserved in place. So tell me a little bit about that and how you incorporated that into your design.
Yeah, I think it's again one of those fun things that you come across in a building that you would never design for. But we saw these. So it was basically the conveyor belts where they would, how they would move the bales of newspaper along from one end of the building to the other, and as well as the big rolls of paper. And so there was quite a lot of these conveyor belts, and so we actually asked the contractor to pull one apart and see what we could do with it. They were so heavy, just like one of these things I could barely lift it. And so what we thought would make sense was, let's leave it in place. I mean, a lot of them were rusted, and they were flush with the floor surface, so it was just a matter of like filling in the gaps. And so these mostly occurred in the southernmost building, as well as on the eastern loading dock side. And so filling in the concrete and then making that flush with the slabs, or the existing slabs around it, so you can just see it's almost like little stepstones of these rusted squares. And on the loading dock side, you'll see them. Sometimes they're marching through planters. Sometimes they're marching through like these new glass box conference rooms that we put on the western side. But it's just this, again, it makes you question, like, you know, someone who's using or visiting the property would be like, what's this? And you realize there's like a story behind that.
Every project, some of my favorite stories actually, every project has interesting construction stories that we learn from, because we all know that's where the rubber meets the road. You can design all day, but can you build it? Or something comes up in a project, especially I have never worked on any kind of renovation or remodeling or adaptive reuse project where you didn't run into something you didn't expect, that you weren't ready for and you had to pivot. This project was built in 3 phases. What were some of the challenges you encountered once you started to build it during construction, and how did you navigate those challenges?
Well, I think one of the big ones was they found out that they were going to go from a multi-tenant to a single-tenant user, and so that changed things. And for security reasons, they weren't going to have the market hall, for example, and so we had, in our minds, like, oh, the southern part of the building is going to be open to the public, and it was designed in a certain way. But so that just took a little bit of a shift. But I think we had known, I mean, it's always easier to go from multi-tenant to single tenant versus the other way around. So it was just something you just had to have a shift in the way you thought about it. And I must say, a lot of the original design, we just kept like the landscape, we just kept marching on with that whole southern and the park at the southern end. But it's just it's, I guess when it comes to security, you think of that in a different way as well. In terms of as you go through construction, you're always coming up against or discovering these things within the project, and you got to think on your feet like, oh, this is interesting. What do we do with it? What, do we keep it? Do we, like, even though we're not supposed to be designing right now, you're supposed to just be documenting or executing. But those are things that kind of make the process kind of unique to adaptive reuse, and actually what I love about it. It's really fun. Like discovering that LA Times sign and figuring out what to do with like the conveyor belts and the loading docks. Like, well, let's keep this gantry or let's keep this piece of equipment just as a folly. So anyway, it's what gives the project its quirkiness and its life.
Well, it's a testament, I think, to your to the solidity and communication of your team that when you did run into those things, you could say, hey, let's keep this. Because I love that you kept that LA Times thing or the Los Angeles thing that you came across. It can be sometimes challenging during construction when you come across things that have to change or that you have to make a decision on, to kind of do that, think on your feet and make it happen sometimes, without some stress involved. But when you have a good solid team, it's like everybody jumps in and says, what are we going to do here? Let's make it happen.
And I can't underline that enough. We had a great team. The owner, Seth Hiramura, with Steel Wave, and the entire Steel Wave team, they were just so supportive, and they really had a vision. And it was a shared vision between all of us, the contractor, the consultant team, our office, and them. And so that's always the best, when you're all kind of pushing in the same direction. And the contractor it was Del Amo Construction, and they were just a dream to work with, and they really know what to do when it comes to these adaptive reuse projects. So it was awesome. What can I say?
And when those team members trust each other, you're the architect, so trust you in your knowledge in that arena, and trust the owner with their vision, and trust the contractor that they know how to make this thing come together, instead of always questioning each other, because I've seen that plenty of times on projects. Then it really does make that relationship where you're like, I'd do this again. I mean, it's a great experience, and I think we could do a better job of that in our industry sometimes.
Yeah, and it's also this kind of environment of, you feel comfortable. Like if we really believed in something, we felt comfortable being able to bring that forward to either the contractor or the client and saying, like, we really think this is the way to go. And it's not like we had to get it every time, but they would listen to us and hear us out. And so I think that's important to have that trust.
Couldn't agree more. Were there any sustainability efforts on this project? I mean,
I'm glad you asked.
Oh, good. I'm glad I asked too. When you get to an old building like this, you're always going, should I ask that question?
Yeah. And I can talk about this for a long time, but I will limit myself. I think really, truly, as architects, like the most sustainable thing we can do is to recycle buildings. I'm not the first person to say it, obviously. I'm not going to be the last. But I think when you have the opportunity, it is really, like, just in terms of the carbon footprint, bringing materials to the site, you have a head start when you have this existing building. And when the bones of those existing buildings are so strong and have so much potential, it's like even more of a reason that one should try to preserve it. So, and that's not just applied to the buildings, but also even to some of the trees on the site. There were some great mature trees that we, it was not necessarily an easy task, but they craned them into different locations that made more sense. So, like, actually right outside this atrium, right behind us, there is a very large tree that was taken from the north end of the site and moved in right in front of that main atrium. And it would take way too long for a tree to grow to that size. So it was, it was just, again, with the landscaping being so important, it was really kind of added to the whole vision for the project. And then just in general, like wellness is really important, and having all these indoor-outdoor spaces, really encouraging people to go outside, have your meetings outside, be able to step outside for a bit of fresh air, and encouraging people to walk in this indoor-outdoor environment. So it's not like you enter into a building and you're sealed and stuck there all day. You're constantly going inside and outside. There was also a part of the project where the level, it was like a loading dock level, and it did not have a direct connection to the grade. And so part of our subtraction was actually removing parts of the slab so we could install ramps and steps so that people on the inside could have a direct access through roll-up doors to their outdoor patio spaces. I think when it comes to sustainability, these were all, in every project, it's always at the back of our mind. It's the way we kind of intuitively design. But I think in a project like this, there were so many great opportunities where we could bring in daylight and views of nature into those spaces.
Rabbit hole number 2, since we're talking about sustainability. So I'm thinking about this building, built in the 60s or 60s. Yeah. Obviously things like plumbing and lighting and HVAC. And I imagine, based on the condition the building was in when you started, that those were some pretty old systems.
Yeah.
Guessing that all got replaced.
That did get all replaced, yes.
Yeah. I was going to say, was there anything there that you could reuse? Probably not that you want to.
Definitely not for the HVAC. No. Yeah. And
interesting.
I doubt it for the electrical too. Yeah. Really, what we were keeping was like the structure.
So I know I learn something from every project I do. What would you say your biggest lesson learned from this project was that will make you a better architect on the next project?
I think structural, like understanding the significance and the impact that structural decisions have, was definitely a lesson learned. I think that in and of itself can really affect the budget of a project. As I mentioned, like the foundations, it's stuff you don't even see, especially when you don't have drawings. So like just identifying those risks early, I think is good to handle early on, just because it's going to affect us. It's going to affect all the other trades, especially the design. So I think that was one of the big lessons I learned. And also just teaming with your engineer early on is not only fun, but it's the recipe for, a good, successful process.
I think it also, I've actually, throughout my career, I've actually worked on the engineering side. Well, and I'm now back on the engineering side. And it was really a game changer in projects when I did 6 years in MEP engineering, when those architects would pull in the MEP engineers nice and early in the project and say, let's talk about some of these big decisions, instead of going and designing all this building and then saying, oh, make your stuff fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really was a difference in how much time and effort and sometimes grief was caused on a project by not working with your engineers early and at least talking about some of those big design decisions.
I 100% agree. And especially when you're working on a adaptive reuse, you don't have the flexibility to tweak the design. It's there, you know what I mean? That those beams and the framing is there. And so you have to make like your sprinklers fit in, or, unless you want to expose it, et cetera. I 100% agree with that.
So I also read that this project has won a ton of awards at every level, not surprised at all. What do you think makes this project so incredibly notable? Just in your opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had great bones to work with. I'm not diminishing our skills as architects, but I think we did have a great starting point. And, I just, this is a hard question to answer because this project kind of, I feel like in some ways it designed itself, and it told us what it wanted to be, and we kind of listened to it. We had a great collaboration with the developer and the contractor to, achieve this project. And so I think it's all these things. It's hard for me to answer that question. But I truly feel like this is one of those lifetime projects that you don't always, you have a few of these in your life as an architect. And so it was a lot of stars aligning.
Well, and just the value of all the different lessons you learned throughout the course of this project, of doing something because it really is drastic. This is a in my opinion, very drastic project to take from what you started with to what it is now. And not having the luxury of designing it the way you want to because you are working with those bones. That takes a special skill, in my opinion. It's one thing to design a building. It's another one to turn a building that's already there with its own bones and its own original, structure and layout, and turn it into something that's having an incredible second life. So that's what I think makes it really notable for me. But like architecture is, it's subjective, but I just, when I went and looked at those old pictures, I was just blown away at what it is now all over again for the next however 50, 100 years or whatever, until the next time they use those good bones for something else.
Yeah.
We hope.
That's the goal, right? That this is going to be a launching pad for someone else who knows how many years from now. Yeah.
So what's next for EYRC? What are you working on that I can look forward to hearing about in the future?
So we are working on a project that's almost done. It's almost completed construction. It's called Casitas, and it's near Larchmont Village. And it's similar in that it's also an adaptive reuse campus, that it was a former Volkswagen van windshield factory. So they used to make the glass for those windshields. And it was like a collection of industrial buildings, and it's converting those into a creative campus with a little cafe in there as well. And so it's partially existing, and then there's also a portion of it that is a new build that is tilt up with a sloped roof. And so
nice.
That's super exciting, and we're using similar strategies of like inserting these little pocket gardens throughout, so that every space has their own little pocket outdoor garden area. I'm also working on a adaptive reuse. There's a common theme here. For Chapman University, we're doing their Institute of Quantum Studies. And so that's in that historic elementary school building that is getting converted into office space, gathering space, and lab spaces, as well as an adjacent 2-story lab building. I
bet those labs have some interesting
stories
very
too.
Specific requirements. Yeah. Make sure you call me about that. I worked on a life sciences building at one point in my career that had all kinds of crazy stuff that went on in it. And it was just so interesting to work on, because it was, again, those kind of lifetime things that you only maybe will ever get one opportunity to work on a project like that with such unique characteristics. So definitely call me about that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, again, it's like, who would have thought that you take 100-year-old elementary school building, it has like a school, the schoolyard and all that, and then turn it into quantum physics, but that's what makes it cool, that kind of jarring together of a program that you wouldn't quite expect. So I like it.
Plus the past with the future.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
mixing
And
of,
it's going to be, it's very unexpected for a lab building. So I think it will trigger different kinds of uses, so.
We had,
I'm excited for that one to
I don't
finish.
remember who the architect was, but we had an old elementary school here that was, I don't know, good 50, 60 years old brick building, very, very traditional elementary school that had been boarded up for years. And the McMinnville brothers, it's a brewery. I don't even know how many McMinnville facilities are in Portland, bought the building and turned it into the entire school into an entertainment venue and concert hall and movie theater and bowling alleys and restaurants. And it is, but they kept all that history. So they have meeting rooms, which are the old classrooms, but the chalkboards, the old style, they kept all that kind of personality. And it's really fun to go there and have dinner or have a conference or go see a movie because of that. So I always close out every episode with 2 questions. The first being a broader industry question. And I usually go troll my guests a little bit to decide what that question is going to be. For you, my eyes jumped right to a couple of things in your bio that stood out to me. Specifically, your lecturing or involvement in the AIA Los Angeles Powerful Women in Design Symposia, the AIA Women's Leadership Summit, and your role as a founding co-chair of the AIA Los Angeles Women in Architecture Committee. So nothing makes me happier than seeing women empower other women, especially in our industry. From your perspective, what could we be doing better to further empower women specifically in AEC?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, being part of the founding of Women in Architecture for AIA-LA, it's just been a fantastic experience that's exposed me to all sorts of groups and people that I would not have encountered otherwise. That goes also for the Women's Leadership Summit. And it's really, I continually am blown away just seeing what the group comes up with year after year for their, they do the symposia you mentioned is called Powerful, the conference. And I'm going to make a plug. It's October 4th. So I hope if you're in LA that you can attend. It's the first Friday. It's always so inspiring, and it's been a great conduit for women architects to kind of commune and discuss the issues that are relevant to us at any stage of one's career. So there's my plug for that. But your question about what could we further be doing to empower women in the AEC industry, I think, promoting and hiring more women in leadership positions. And I say particularly in the construction and development fields. I mean, I think we still have a ways to go in architecture, but I honestly, the people I encounter, for clients in my work that are women heading either GC companies or are developers, I can count them on one hand. And that shouldn't be the case. I feel like I would just love to see that change.
I couldn't agree more. Final question. Everybody gets this question. Easy one. We all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. I hope I'll do something, to leave behind some positive, good thing. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
So I would love that my impact would be to make spaces that are really beloved by their communities and that they're enjoyed by many people for a long time. That the spaces would evolve with the times and that they might become part of a future story, a future narrative. That it would be recycled, it would be reworn, retold.
I love that answer, especially in light of the project we just talked about. Because you did exactly that with this building. You took what was there and kept that heart and that history and everything that came with that building and gave it a new life. And by doing that, you're already achieving your mission, in my opinion. Patty, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This has been an absolute pleasure. I hope that you'll come back and tell us about another project in the future.
Thank you, Cherise. It was a lot of fun.